All right, hi everybody. We're going to be looking at EDLE 6363, Managing Materials in the Guthrie textbook today. Something slightly different for this particular lesson. You'll notice that I am trying this without my visual being there. I was encouraged to basically pilot a system called Integrity that looks really cool, so I'm going to give it a shot. I'm still physically recording and with the regular YouTube camera, but we'll get both perspectives and you can kind of tell me which one you like, and that'll help me moving forward figure out what of these is going to be the most beneficial. So some key ideas related to this. We're going to be looking at the relationship of purchasing to accounting, which I think is important. What should be done for how you warehouse? Should warehousing be done as a site-based management thing, or should warehousing be done at the actual school building? Which that's another issue, another problem that we might be looking at, and how are supplies distributed throughout different buildings. So this is an important facet of your job. I think this is one of the chapters that actually could pertain to you as superintendents, basically because we're looking at this notion of what you are doing with inventory control and purchasing, and if and you have to basically find out what the principals need and what the principals want in their position. So one of the things that I think is important is in state regulation, you have full autonomy over what you purchase, and it's provided from the state. The 10th Amendment does allow that that we have state level regulations. So the state level regulation says we can purchase, and it's done at the district level as long as state regulations were followed. So there are federal mandates, but the main federal mandate that you have to know of, and it's kind of a no-brainer to me, it's basically that the purchase is illegal if it has no relevance to the school. Well, I could think of a million things that you could somehow spin and make relevant to a school purchase. So I would argue that even though there are federal mandates, we're looking more at state mandates when it comes to school purchasing rights. So we talk about bidding. Bidding is important because bidding is something that's centralized at the district level. It allows us to have standardized purchasing criteria, and that can be specialized specifically to what we're purchasing. We have to look at both quality and quantity while still keeping in mind price. So we make those decisions at the building level based on the people that are ultimately going to be using everything. So we know that educational materials, supplies, and equipment come from competitive markets. The purchasing department is kind of in a position where they have to pick what's the most beneficial to the school system, and that's kind of the goal of what they're doing. But what I think you need to note here that means more than anything else, it really relates to cost. You want to make sure that cost isn't an issue and cost isn't a problem, because if the district is going for the cheapest way out, that might not be the most beneficial to the school system. So when we have large systems, then we have formalized and regimented systems, basically meaning that purchases are done to benefit many of the stakeholders within the district, not just a specific target. So if we're buying a new full curriculum run for social studies, for instance, it might be going to 8 or 10 different buildings. So that purchase doesn't just affect one principal in one building, it affects others as well. Sometimes this means that the educator themselves, the teacher, might not have any autonomy over the purchases themselves. Our book, as you know, because all these books are really geared towards this notion of performance-based budgeting and site-based management. Once again, I'm trying to be realistic for all of you and tell you that, sure, this is a great idea, this is something that we would ultimately want, but we know that there's not necessarily autonomy over things like that all the time. In small systems, the business administrator and the superintendent make the purchasing decision, and even the teachers can make requests as well. So that can be a positive. That can be a positive for you as well. So when you have site-based decisions, we can have issues if there are mergers or consolidations, because building to building purchases are different, and needs and requirements and requests are different. If it's a site-based management system and the site decides that they're using one curriculum over the other, that can be a problem, and that can be an issue. So then, you know, if the districts decide to merge or consolidate, purchases were made that are to the benefit and purchases are made that aren't to the benefit. So then we have to determine how they benefit the district and not. So when we talk about what purchasing is to other administrative divisions, we need to keep in mind that you need to cost out the programs and where the budget needs to go, and that purchasing considerations have to be ones that make long-term impact, meaning that when we're making this money and we're making these purchasing decisions, they have to help the district over the course of time, and they have to be long-term decisions that are made. So what are the objectives of purchasing? Why should schools do it? Well, schools should do it really to keep as much quality as they possibly can, and also to avoid duplication and waste. And that's bullet number 3 up here. But that's important. When you're making purchasing decisions for your district, you need to make sure that you're not duplicating or wasting anything, and you're not wasting anything that could be used and could be utilized by the district. So what do we do? How do we go through the purchasing system? That's kind of what we're going to look at here, some basic overviews of that. So basically, the first thing you do is you make a requisition. Normally what happens is a teacher will be the one that requests the idea and says, this is what we need, this is going to make our classroom instruction better, so we should do this. So then they follow the chain of command. The teacher goes to the department chair goes to the principal goes to the business office, goes to the superintendent in some cases, and they'll make a requisition, and other stakeholders are notified that the requisition was made. Then at the district level, you determine what you're looking for, what the type of quality is, and how much you're going to be getting. Of this necessary material. You check material to show that it meets purchasing specifications, and they always suggest that if you have a previously established relationship with a vendor, that's another positive as well. So we'll go over the bidding process a little bit, but you have to understand that the district should insist on firm bids. They should be fair on the bidding process. They should make sure that when they're having a requisition, that when an actual bid occurs, then they're handling it in a fair way and it was sealed, and the other vendors don't know what the other people were bidding. So then you adjust it based on other specifications. So another possible thing that I think needs to be noted, especially in this state, is that a lot of vendors will offer lower prices if you buy in bulk. And my experience in purchasing wasn't for buying curriculum, textbooks, anything like that, but I was the decision maker at my district for computer purchases. And I can tell you this for a fact, that when I would look back on, with the difference between buying 50 computers versus 75 or 100, it was significant. We're talking about $75 or $80 savings on units just for large orders. So if superintendents work in consortium with each other, you can make larger purchases, work together on purchasing, and it can benefit the districts and it can benefit the students as a whole as well. Cash discounts are also important, and then if the material is delivered late, then you can get a time discount, basically meaning they'll give you a discount because they couldn't get you the stuff that they needed to in time. So what's the big and what's the most important concept for this chapter? It's right here. This is slide 17. This is what I'm going to put on the quiz. This is kind of where the big idea comes into play. We're going to talk about all these different steps involved in the bidding process. It's fairly quick, but it's also something that I think is important and worth noting. So most school districts require you to have a public advertising for a bid if the district is going to be making a major purchase. Normally, a newspaper is required, and the district level can have performance records that are readily available on prior purchases. So you have to advertise the bid first. Local channels must normally have an advertising of the bid. Then in this advertisement, you have to make sure that it includes the following so you don't get sued. There has to be legal advertisement, instructions on what to do, what the conditions are. The conditions are normally the time frame. Special bid conditions, if there's something that has to be done, you need assistive technology in the purchase that you're making, what specific items you're looking for, and then the actual forms for the bid proposal. And that should all be available at the district level. So I can't stress this enough. You know, obviously, my experience hasn't been in Oklahoma yet at the school level with stuff like this, but I can tell you a number of times that bids got out when they shouldn't have got out, and the superintendent and the school business manager were the ones that kind of got in trouble for this. So what we strongly encourage you to do is have color-coded envelopes, make sure they're sealed, and lock them until the actual opening of the bid. That way people don't know and don't have an automatic advantage over the processing of the bids. When the bid opens, you do this with the control of the person responsible for the function, the one that's going to make the ultimate decision. But you should also have one or two other people present. If they're interested citizens, they should be there too. If it's a major purchase, like a new building, a new facility, you would always want to have a reporter present as well, and then read aloud the bid so that everybody knows that you've been as fair and as transparent as possible. So the district can determine whether or not that late bids are acceptable, and it can be a legal liability. My advice is that this should be in the district policy manual that at least says we accept late bids, but blah, blah, blah. We don't accept late bids, but blah, blah, blah. The other thing that is going to happen is there are going to be errors made in the bidding process, especially when you're dealing with, tens of millions of dollars for building facilities. Sometimes somebody might have one number that's wrong. That can be a problem. If they make a mistake, you should be able, if it's genuine consent, you should be able to withdraw that, but it should be noted on their evaluation form that this occurred so that this doesn't occur in the future. I strongly agree with that as well. What normally happens? Well, this is if we were teaching business law, this is what I would go over. I would go over these 4 different categories. I would say, an offer was made. The offer is the actual bid itself, the posting of the bid, and the acceptance is when somebody decides to put in a bid. You have to be competent to actually contract, meaning you have the means and the capabilities to do it. It's legal what you're doing, the subject matter is legal, and there was enough consideration on the part. If this isn't making sense to you and you're thinking about it, honestly, think about what happens when you go on eBay. If I want to buy a video game on eBay, I make an offer. As soon as the time clock ends, the offer is accepted. I have to be competent, meaning I have the money and I'm making a realistic purchase. It has to be something legal. I can't be buying something that was bootlegged or illegal. And then there had to have been time to consider it, and they had the opportunity to consider my offer as well. So that's basically how it works. I mean, it's just like if we were talking about a contract in a business law class. It is what it is. So what are the security requirements? Well, bids are deposited in the form of cashier's check, money orders, or currency. That tends to be where the deposit comes from, and it's good because then the district has something tangible that's in their hands. This happens all the time. Adequacy of completion can't be attained. It's difficult working with schools. There are no positives to schools that operate on these different time frames because we have schools and functions of schools where you have to have something done within A, B, or C, and then once it's done and once it's finished, then it's good, but what if there's weather conditions? What if the school year's extended for some reason? What if something happens that causes it not to happen? Well, that's going to cost the school money, especially with facilities bidding, because then we don't have enough in place where the kids can actually function and have have a usable facility. So if that happens, the legal representative should be involved and understand what contract fulfillment looks like. So I always argue that vendors should be evaluated based on their adequacy and their service. Once again, what is the role of the school business administrator? The role of the school business administrator is to save money, so price is the most important factor, but it shouldn't be the overall deciding factor. Other things that are important are they responsive to you? Is there prompt submission of data? Do they do the services that are expected of them? Obviously, you need to act as ethically as possible. Schools are at the center of the community, so it's very, very, very important that you act ethically and you ensure correct success when you're bidding. So what do we need to think about now? If we've talked about bidding, well, we need to talk about the purchasing function. So Now, how do we purchase something? We've gone over what a bid looks like. Let's go over what the purchasing function looks like. And honestly, from the perspectives you are all in, try to think about this from a superintendent perspective. If you are making sure that all this is occurring, you have nothing to worry about. If it's not occurring, then you have a problem, the district has a problem, and we can have issues with things. So the role of the requisitioner, they're the one that really tells the purchasing department there's a need for something in the school district. They'll tell you the quantity and the date in which the requisition must be made. Once again, just because it's what I have experience in purchasing, in going through bidding processes in my previous position, we'll talk about this in the form of computers. Let's say we know that there are 7 buildings in the district, and I know personally that they need 350 Dell computers and 75 monitors with it. We're going to use some of the older monitors. So I'll tell the purchasing department that we need computers and we need them by the start of the 2017-2018 school year. So I'll make a requisition. Then I'll say the quantity and the date in which the requisition must be made, and that gives time for things to take place and shape up. Then I'll make a purchase order. I'll say what we need, how many we need. I'll look for discounts. I'll give the date that I'm putting the purchasing request in, hoping that it'll be done and resolved by a certain time, and then conditions of the transaction. For major orders with computers, one of the things that we used to put in our district is that if it wasn't done by a certain time, then we have the right to refuse service, and normally would ask for a certain sum of money back as well. Shipping instructions and thorough descriptions of materials are also important, especially when you're dealing with fragile items that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then you decide where the equipment goes to. The district I worked at had 7 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, 1 high school, so there were 10 buildings and then a central repository. Some of you are working in much smaller districts, some of you are working in much bigger districts. So the warehouse receives it, and then they basically make sure and check for quality control. They see that everything has come, that everything's in the right form, and then they'll store the items, and then they'll distribute them as necessary. Then the accounting department needs to check and make sure that the right items came, there was not duplication, and then payment is authorized if necessary. So then the school team says where it's going to, what we're going to do with it, what building it's going to go to, and that sort of thing. And that comes under the form of inventory control. If you purchase correctly, you should not salvage, and you should not have scrap items. If surplus does occur, one of the things that I always suggested doing with extracurricular purchases, extra technology purchases, I would dump to the elementary schools, and honestly, you think about who needs the equipment the most and where the more cutting edge stuff is done. One of the things that we always try to do is make sure the high school got the best stuff, and then the elementary school got stuff that was maybe a year or 2 older, less expensive, that sort of thing. But you could also trade or sell with other school partners as well, which is why this idea of strategic partnership is everything. So you can sell back to the vendor if you bought more than you needed and the vendor's willing to purchase back. You can certainly do that as well. So that is an option and something to consider. So sometimes too, the district could lease. Leasing is good if you want to try something before you buy it. If you have made mistakes, and as I've said 100 times so far in this class, you're paying for the sins of others. If that occurs, that's certainly an advantage to leasing as well. So the other thing that can happen is that occasionally the items that are in the system could be destroyed. Every school system will eventually destroy something because of space considerations. If you can sell it to somebody who can use it, that's great. I would strongly encourage you to do that first. One of the other things that you have to know and keep in mind is that materials can be transferable between the district. Once again, I know I'm talking from a technology perspective, but think about some of these smart board